Today on the Health Evolution Collective, we are meeting Richard Turnbull. Richard is an accredited exercise physiologist and a sports scientist. He has been in the industry for many, many years, working with the Springboks and many professional athletes over the years. He's also a personal friend of Professor Tim Noakes, and he contacted me after he listened to the podcast chat I had with him a little while ago. And he shares some insights. He shares, what he's seen over the years change in the field of exercise, and also what he believes we all need to eat to live or give our body the best chance at optimal health. So enjoy the little chat that I had with Richard Turnbull.
Hi, Tracy. Thanks so much for inviting me to talk to you this morning.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure. So I thought it might be really nice for you to share with everyone, obviously, a little bit about you and what you do, which sounds fascinating, and also, how we came into contact.
Yeah, sure, Tracy. But before I do that, I continue, and I'd first like to congratulate you on your excellent 3-day all-female low-carb virtual summit you put on.
Oh, thank
you. I thought
you.
That was excellent. I know you called it the all-female low-carb, but there were a lot of men listening in.
There were. Oh, thank you so much. That means so much. It was definitely the highlight of my professional career so far. That and talking to Professor Tim Noakes, that was another big highlight.
Yeah, I listened to that podcast actually, and I thought it went well. And that was my first intro to you, basically, was listening to that podcast. Yeah. That was all good. Well, I'm an exercise physiologist and have been in private practice for 33 years, 24 of those years in Australia. Prior to that, I was in South Africa. And what I basically do is I prescribe exercise for individuals presenting with various pathologies. And my programs are very much person-centered, but I do consider the person's holistic approach to life. So I consider factors such as nutrition, sleep, stress. And I think that's very important. Exercise on its own, I believe, you get a lot of results, it's important. But if you're suffering from something like insulin resistance, for example, and you're eating a lot of refined carbohydrates or a lot of the junk foods that we've been told to eat, then you're going to become diabetic, and that's going to happen, definitely. You mentioned Professor Tim Noakes, and he's mentioned that before. He'd run 70 ultra marathons or marathons, and he still developed type 2 diabetes. So he had a genetic predisposition to get it, and he only changed and started reversing his diabetes when he went onto a very low carb diet. So I think that's important, And then I also have qualifications in long distance running and also rugby union. And I've done most of the Nutrition Network courses. I think the only one I haven't done is the one on advice, I think, if I remember. I can't quite remember, but I've done the low carb, high fat ketogenic nutrition and treatment one. I've done the low carb, high fat in clinical practice. I've done the low carb, high fat for dietitians, and I've done the ethics training, and I've done all the free doctor's desk courses. It's such a those courses are so good, and I think we learn so much from them. And I'd really recommend people to go in and have a look.
Absolutely. So would I. I've done a lot of them too. I think they're fantastic. They're so they've got the science, but they've got the practical side as well, and it's really, you don't have to be, have gone through university really to understand the way they present it, yet they've got the science there as well. So yeah, I think they're fantastic courses. So very interested in your journey. The podcast is Health Evolution, and it's, it is looking and hearing people's stories of their health evolution. So you talked about, you've been in this industry for such a long time. Now I would imagine, have had a personal and a professional health evolution in terms of what around nutrition and exercise. Is there some, how did that happen for you? Was there like a light bulb moment, or was it a gradual thing? Are you able to share a little bit about that?
Yes, it's an interesting one, Tracy, and I actually learned about the low carb high fat through Professor Noakes, believe it or not. And but before I carry on further and tell you about my journey, I'd like to backpedal right back to the 1st of August 1987.
Okay.
Now that's a story that I share with Tim. Very few people know about it, but he's quite happy for me to share that. And he paid me a visit on the 1st of August, which was a Saturday, 1987. I'll tell you later on why I can remember that date very, very well. The 2nd of August was a Sunday, so my wife and I made breakfast, and we made bacon and eggs and a sausage to go with it. But we also had the, all bran, it was raisin bran actually as well on the table, some bread, some freshly squeezed orange juice, jam, butter. And the plates came in, we put them in front of us, and Professor Noakes pushed the plate away and he said, "Sorry, I really apologize. I cannot eat that high fat. It's not good for you." Anyway, he went on and he ate the raisin bran and the toast. He drank the fruit juice, and that was it. I subsequently didn't want to waste, so I had his bacon and eggs as well. So that's basically the story. And for 25 years, I've been feeling so embarrassed about it because, I had a top scientist who I hosted, and I've known Professor Noakes for 40 years. And I really felt bad about it because everything was about carbs, and I was coaching a lot of top class athletes, and everything was about carb loading and carbs and so on. But I've always eaten fat. But the other problem is I've also eaten a lot of carbohydrates because I've been taught to do that. So the combination, I think, is not all that good. Mm. But anyway, but I think that tells a story because Professor Noakes, what separates him from a lot of other scientists, I think, is that he's always prepared to acknowledge when he's wrong. Yeah. I don't know if you've read his book, The Law of Running, which I think that may have been his first book that was published in 1986. Mm. And he dedicated a whole section on carbohydrates, nutrition, which he recently acknowledged was incorrect. And he was actually making people unhealthy. And it's not necessary to eat all those carbs. He actually tore out the book. And that separates him from a lot of other scientists, when you can acknowledge that you are wrong. So when did I really become interested in carbs and learned? It was from Professor Noakes. It was in 2012, which was at the Exercise and Sports Science Australia conference, which was held at the Gold Coast up in Queensland. And my wife and Professor Noakes had lunch together. And I didn't know much about the low carbs at that stage and what he was up to. But I noticed that he'd ordered full cream cheese, meat, and green salad. And I nudged my wife and I said, "Look at this," just quietly. And she looked at it and I thought that was quite strange because the last time I gave him that sort of meal, he refused it. And then he told me about the science behind low carb and the importance of low carb and metabolic syndrome and diabetes and so on. So that was my first introduction basically to low carb, high fat. And then again, I attended the low carb conference in Melbourne, which was on the 30th of August 2014, if I remember correctly. Mm-hmm. And there I gained more insight into the science of low carb, high fat lifestyle. And I've reduced my carbohydrate intake quite substantially. I'm not very low carb, but I'm low carb. So mine varies between sort of 80 and about 120 a day, I would say. I'm probably moderately insulin resistant. And why I say that, because I remember years ago, my liver functions were a little bit, they weren't all that good. Mm-hmm. And the doctor wasn't all that worried because my blood sugars were relatively normal. They were around about 5.6, 5.7. But thinking back, I definitely was moderately insulin resistant, and I probably would have become diabetic in the longer term if I stayed with all those refined carbohydrates and sugars and so on. Mm. So that basically is my journey, really, in terms of the low carb, high fat.
So when did you see that you had to bring it into your work? Because often, you know, when I talk to people, and certainly my journey as well, was very much personal first. You know, I made the changes, saw how it changed, you know, improved my own health. And then, of course, you know, I was a personal trainer at the time, and, you know, I was like, well, you can't unsee this stuff. You know, I have to sort of start sharing it in my work and helping people. And you know, but it took me a little while to sort of get to that point. What about for you? Did you, you know, how did you bring it in, and did you have any barriers around doing that, or have you been quite supported in how you, you know, work with your clients?
Well, both, I would say, supportive and not supportive. So when you show them the science, and then they go and read up on the science, then they tend to be quite responsive, and they follow. Part of my low carb, high fat dietitian's course, I actually did a case study of one of the clients who was a 72-year-old person, and he was 105 kilograms. He had a triple bypass, and he was also then diagnosed with diabetes too. And he did a lot of reading, and he decided to go along this path of low carb, high fat. His doctors were basically against it. They were worried about it. His cholesterol was high. They put him on statins, etc. But a long story short, he followed the diet. He started on around about 50 grams of carbohydrates, and his blood sugar started improving pretty quickly within 2-3 weeks. And he decided to take himself off statins, which was against the doctor's recommendations at that time. And eventually went off metformin and off all the statins. His cholesterol went up a bit, but his ratios of cholesterol are very, very good. So he's actually improved. He's come down to 67 kilograms from 105 kilograms, just following this lifestyle. He exercises well, he feels good, there's no more brain fog. So that's an example of one of the clients. But I started thinking about this quite a long time ago, in 2012, when Professor Noakes was talking to me about that, because I'd get a lot of clients who were diabetic, and I'd give them exercise, and they'd sort of, their blood sugars would improve a little, but until they went onto a proper eating low carb lifestyle, blood sugars didn't change very much. So all they did, the insulin levels went up, the more carbohydrates they ate. And it's just terrible, you know, and so that changed me quite a lot. And I talk, you know, that's what I advocate most of the time, is to people with metabolic syndrome or cardiac or high blood pressure, is to read the science and decide for themselves what they'd like to do and follow.
Yeah, well, that's good. I mean, it's interesting because I think the sports medicine guys here in Australia are, you know, at the forefront of a lot of, you know, change. I certainly know, you know, Dr. Peter Bruckner, you know, I've had him on the podcast, and he's talked about what you were saying, you know, with Tim Noakes. He was the same, you know, he said, I had to admit I was wrong, and it wasn't a very nice feeling to do it, but I was wrong. And, you know, to do that is a very brave thing to do. And then, of course, he's been involved in writing, you know, him and Dr. Paul Mason, I think, have just finished rewriting the nutrition section of the medical sports science textbooks. And he said, look, it's not all low carb, but it's predominantly low carb now. And, you know, he said that there's still so much pushback, but yet these guys just, you know, I don't know, just seem to see the difference in people with diet and, you know, exercise. So if you're insulin resistant, you know, certainly with the clients I have, you know, they're generally overweight, insulin resistant. I mean, exercise is a struggle. It really is. They've hardly got enough energy to get through their day, let alone exercise on top of it. But when you change the diet first, things start to work properly. I can't tell you, and you would see this too, how many times people just say, oh, I've just got energy now. Oh, I'm just going to start exercising for the first time.
That's right. I mean, your energy levels definitely go up. I mean, I mean, I've seen it often. I've seen it with myself. But, you know, getting back to you know, what happens out there and the barriers that we always got to put up with, you know, if you go back to Professor Noakes' trial, for an example, he made a simple tweet, you know, but what he basically said, the key is to wean baby off low carb, high fat. And so he was reported to the Health Professions Council of South Africa, and it ended up being a 4-year trial. Ridiculous. But the interesting thing about it, I think the trial was important in the fact that it fast-tracked the science of low-carb, high-fat. I think if that trial didn't happen, and also the one of Gary Fetka, the orthopedic surgeon from Tasmania, things would have been different. So yeah, I felt so sorry for Professor Noakes at the time, but I'm excited that it actually happened because he was exonerated, number one, and it's done such a lot of good in terms of people's health, make them aware of the importance of eating properly, especially a lower carb diet. So that was a good outcome from that perspective. Yep.
Yep, that's right. So it was almost like, it wasn't just Noakes on trial, it was the low carb lifestyle was on trial as well, and it was exonerated as well. And exactly. I think it definitely has done a lot of good. And my point though is that certainly here in Australia, it's still not officially recognised as an option. You know, like, and until we get that, it's not, you know, they don't have to come out. This is what Belinda Fettke says, you know, like they don't have to come out and say it is the only way, but they need to say that it is an option to give people, because until they do that, I think there's still going to be pushback and fear around, you know, professionals offering it as an option. Do you see that?
That's very true, but you know, things are changing slowly. I'm sure you've read the book, you know, the CSIRO, the Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, which is an Australian federal government agency. Mm. And they published that book, The Low Carb Diet, in 2017, and I think it was reprinted in 2018, towards the end of 2018. And they've acknowledged that through a lot of scientific research. So that's a good breakthrough. And then the other one, interesting enough, subsequent to the 2018 reprinting of the book, the Diabetes Australia on the 15th of August 2018, in their position statement, they acknowledged that type 2 diabetics, that there's reliable evidence that lower carb eating can be safe and useful in the short term. They didn't reach in the long term yet. Now, we all know that there's been such interesting research by the Virta Health and the Noakes Foundation and various other people that even in the longer term, there's benefit. And it's quite an easy lifestyle to follow. It's not very difficult at all. If you can get past your taste buds, you'll be fine.
Yeah, often it is just getting past those initial hurdles, isn't it? And like anything we do that's new, it's always challenging in the beginning, but for some reason we think we should be an expert at it straight away, and when we're not, we, you know.
That's right, you know, and there's so much, you know, incorrect science or fake science out there, you know. There's a lot of concerns about peer review, for an example, and I read somewhere that Dr. Richard Smith, who was a former editor of the British Medical Journal, and in 2006, he said that there's little evidence on the effectiveness of peer review, but considerable evidence on its defects. So he acknowledged that, an ex-editor, former editor of British Medical Journal. And then I think we've all read about Professor John Ioannidis, who is head of medicine and epidemiology and public health from Stanford University. And he appraises evidence. He's very, very good in appraising evidence. And he said that more rigorous nutrition research is required, as most of it is flawed. And that's a strong statement, because you hear all sorts of, you know, the carnivore diet is bad and meat is bad for you, only veganism is good, and all that type of stuff. And there's no good scientific evidence for that I can find anyway. And I might be speaking under correction. So I think we've got to be very careful what we read. We've got to look at the science. And it's very difficult to disprove the low-carb science. You see the evidence every day. Blood pressure improves, blood sugars drop, cholesterol is improved. All those sort of things are extremely important, and you can witness them every day from our clients and from the scientific literature. All we really want is the truth and science.
Yeah.
That's what we want.
Yeah.
We don't want untruths.
No, and there is so much out there. I mean, the World Health Organization, they say red meat is bad, and what is it? I don't know, they word it in some funny way, but look, I think unfortunately we have to do our own research, and we have to be curious enough to look beyond what we are told, by places like that who, at the moment, of course they're under a lot of pressure, with what's going on in the world anyway. But I don't know. I just think when we peel the layers back and understand, like I love the work that Belinda Fettke has done in uncovering the links between, religion and breakfast cereals, the Seventh-day Adventists and sanitarium. I mean, the fact that a company like that has so much influence in what we eat, plus they don't pay any tax here in Australia.
Right, exactly.
It's just phenomenal. And, I think when we start scratching at the surface and we see stuff like that, it does help us to, I guess, feel a little more comfortable in doing, and in making the changes. But one thing you said before, which I found very interesting, when you were talking about, might have been the case study that was in the dietitian's course through the Nutrition Network, about the client who or the patient that, was put on low carb or recommended low carb, and then they went to a specialist, and the specialist said, stop eating all that fat, or, I'm, paraphrasing here, but that scenario is absolutely so common. I've been doing some research for my talk tomorrow night that I'm having in the Nutrition Network around addressing some of the barriers. And when I spoke to a lot of my GP colleagues, that was one of the things that they said. Often they will put and recommend low carb to their patient. Their patient then goes off to a specialist, a cardiologist or something, and the cardiologist says to them, well, what are you doing? Don't be doing that. Stop eating fat and go back to having oats for breakfast. So, when you are, the patient there, that can be really, really hard and to know what to do and very confusing.
That's right. It can be very confusing. And I think even the vegetarians or the vegan or, people who decide to follow that type of eating habit, which is fine because it's all personal, they can also eat a lot of high fat, plant-based fats, avocados and like things like olive oil and so on. So you can still achieve a high fat lifestyle without necessarily going down the meat route. I like my meat, so I have meat.
Yeah, me too.
And but I like my vegetables as well, mainly the green vegetables, and they're low in carbohydrates, so that's fine. But you mentioned meat earlier on. The problem is when they do the research, has the meat that they're eating been manufactured from a feedlot animal? In other words, they've been fed a lot of rubbish and antibiotics and growth hormones. And so is it the meat or is it what is in the meat? That's another question. Is it organic? Is it not only is it grass-fed? If you go back to carnivore, and I'm not a carnivore, but I eat a lot of meat. I love my meat, but as I mentioned earlier, you mentioned in one of your podcasts, Dr. Sean Baker, who's written that book, The Carnivore Diet, and he's been a carnivore for quite a long time, certainly I'd say much longer than 2 years, and there's been no adverse effects of following that type of diet. And you also might know the story of Lieutenant Frederick Schwarzka, who spent a year in the Arctic, and he covered about 5,000 kilometers on foot, and all he ate was meat, because there was no carbohydrates. You don't get carbohydrates in the Arctic Circle. And he returned with 17 of his companions, and there was no ill health amongst all of them, including the dogs. And then also in 1907, I think it was, there was Stephenson, who lived with the Inuit settlement for 10 years. And all they ate was fish and reindeer. And he returned, and there was no ill health. He had no ill health at all. And then he put it to an experiment in 1929 with a colleague, where he just ate meat for 1 year. And they did blood tests and various medical tests, and there was no adverse effect. So, based on those studies, it's very difficult to agree with those who are against red meat. And you can't do a proper randomized controlled trial anyway. It's an observation.
No, you can't, because what about the bread they're probably eating it with, or everything else that they're probably eating it, it's That's very right. difficult. And, as we know, when you're relying on people to feedback over a long period of time what they ate and how much they ate, and it doesn't take into account whether they are smokers or not, or they exercise or not, or, there's just so many other factors. I remember watching something, and we'll put it down below in the show notes if anyone is interested, but I think I was very skeptical. I mean, I've always eaten meat. I've never been interested. Actually, that is not true. When I was 16, we went on a road trip around Australia. I was with my parents, and I saw a lot of carcasses on the, like animals that had been hit by trucks or cars or whatever. And for a period of 3 months, I decided to go vegetarian. Can't tell my children this because I've told them that none of them are allowed to be vegetarian. Right. And it lasted, I didn't last, obviously 3 months, that was it. But otherwise, as an adult, I've never had any interest in being, because to me, it just makes me feel so good. It's, and I've done all this, I've looked into it. I'm very, very happy with meat. And now I've completely lost where I was going with that. There you go.
When you were 16.
Oh, that's right. But I remember having in the early days a couple of clients who really were unsure about meat and whether they should be eating meat. And because I'm very big on protein, I think generally we don't eat enough, and women particularly don't eat enough. And of course, then we eat protein that's not optimal. So we're looking at plant-based proteins and all that sort of stuff. And so I thought, right, I'm going to go and find some really good stuff that I can share with my clients, because my job is not to tell anyone what to do. My job is to give options and for them to make their own decision. And I remember finding some excellent videos by Dr. Ken Berry. Have you come across him?
I've read some of his stuff, yep.
Yeah, and he did one on red meat and cancer. He did one on processed meat and cancer, and I just watch those, and that was they're the ones I share with my clients now. If you have concerns, just watch this and see, because he goes through what is wrong with the research and how there is just virtually zero evidence of what they say, what that red meat causes cancer. So there's definitely stuff out there. And I think too, as an individual, we've got to take some responsibility and some control around what we are told. And if something doesn't feel right, or a bit uncomfortable about something, or we're getting conflicting advice from different people, then we need to make our own choices and do a little bit of research and work out what works for us.
That's exactly correct. And I think it's so person-centered, isn't we? All individuals in their own right. And this is why a lot of the research is so difficult to do, because you can have a blanket outcome where, if people are on a low carb, high fat, where they would reduce their blood sugars. Some people do that very well if they have 80 grams of carbs a day. Others require to have 27 carbs a day. If they increase from 27 to 30, their blood sugar spike. It is so individualistic, and I think you've got to consider the person. You've got to look at the whole picture. And I think that's very, very important. You know, they often talk about ketones is bad for you. You need glucose for brain health. It's been shown that the brain functions pretty well on ketones. There's an interesting study I just come to mind now by the glycotive stress research in 2016, and they found that the placentas of healthy pregnant women have high ketone levels at term. It's around about 2.2 and above millimoles per liter. So they have ketones. And newborns rely on ketones as fuel until lactose-rich breast milk comes in. That was interesting as well. So healthy infants stay in ketosis for at least the first month of life. So that tells you a story as well. Are ketones all that bad for you, or are they not?
Well, yeah, and how about that brain fog? You know, that seems
right.
to disappear, you know, when we are fueling ourselves with fat rather than glucose, you know, it just, yeah, it does. And you know, I know some people have said to me, you know, Tracy, I didn't even know I was living with brain fog. I didn't even know how clear I could feel and how much sharper my brain could be, you know. So, yeah, I know that one. I just like, yeah, okay.
That's right. The other thing that's just come to mind that concerns me a bit, and I question, is the Australian diet guidelines. And the American guidelines will probably be similar. I mean, if you have a look at the Australian dietary guidelines, they have 5 principal recommendations. And we are encouraged to enjoy a wide variety of nutritious foods from these 5 food groups every day. Now, this, in my opinion, is quite wrong, because if you have a look at some of those food groups, they are so full of sugar, refined carbohydrates, you know, soda drinks. And there's no indication how many of those you should be having. You know, there's often a sort of comment made, reduce your sugar content. Means nothing. If I was having 100 grams a day, reducing to 80, is that good enough? It's not specific enough. And I think those guidelines will have to change. And I believe they will change in the future, no doubt.
Yeah, they have to change. And I know they've slowly changed, but what they seem to be doing too, is Belinda again has pointed out, is, you know, they're removing the meat from the guidelines and replacing it with plant-based proteins and foods. And, you know, again, I mean, it's changing, but whether it's going to be changing in the right direction, I don't know. I still think there's so much money invested behind all of that, you know, and it's going to take a brave government or whoever makes those decisions to separate, you know, that from industry. I think you know, but you can't. I think a groundswell that's happening is definitely just going to keep on happening, and you know, that's where, you know, that's one of the things Prof Noakes said, you know, I think that's where change will happen. You know, it is from people that will go to their doctors and they say, well, you know, I don't want to be put on medication, or I don't want, you know, don't just tell me to eat less, move more, you know, I want to do something else, or let's talk about this low carb lifestyle.
I think that's quite true. And I think individuals will change it. I mean, if you have a look at the summit you put on 2 weekends ago, that's going to reach out to so many people. And they're going to read the science, and they're going to find out for themselves that what we've been told now is totally incorrect. You know, and it's important. You know, that's the only way you can change, because money is powerful. You know, the pharmaceutical industry, the food industry, the systems that are in place don't allow for change very, very quickly. It takes time. But individuals can make a big difference in making the changes. So I think that's important. Yeah,
definitely important. And I think, you know, I can't even tell you the number, but it was just lovely to hear how many people sent me messages saying, you know, for the first time in their life they've ever, that's the first time they've ever heard of low carb. Like, I think there's so much stigma out there around what low carb means, and that's why I was really at pains to explain that there's nothing voodoo about it. It's just real food. That's all it is. That's all we're saying.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, it is up to you as to where you go based on your health needs, and as you were saying before, looking at the individual and everything else that's going on in their lives, the stress that's going on, whether they're sleeping. I think when we change the food, it has a bit of a cascade effect in that a lot of other things do generally improve, but we have to take it one step at a time. We can't just overnight change everything. And I think sometimes professionals expect, I suppose, people to just change overnight.
That's right. You can't. That's exactly right. But you're talking about, it's quite interesting. When I started eating more fat or less carbohydrates, put it that way, so I had to adjust by eating more fat than I did. I'm talking about good fat. I'm not talking about trans fats or the processed oils. Those are bad fats. My cholesterol went up quite substantially. So I'm one of those lean mass hyper responders, one of those 20%ers or 25%ers of people, whereby your LDL does go up, but that's not much of a problem because your HDL goes up as well, and your triglycerides drop, and then your ratios improve. So my triglycerides, HDLs are good. My total cholesterol, HDL is good. My LDL, HDL is good. In fact, it's very good. And a friend of mine who's also like-minded, he's a cardiologist. I won't mention his name now because he might get into trouble. You want to do experiments. So he sent me for a CAC, coronary artery calcium score. And I was 60 at that time, 68 now. It was 0.
Wow.
With high cholesterol. And then 3 years later to repeat it to see if there's any progress. And it was still 0. I don't know what it is now. I'm not going to bother.
No.
It's going to carry on eating fat.
Yes.
That's done a lot of good for me. So that's quite important because some people do worry when their cholesterol goes up, and then they do get, some of the medical profession do worry about it. They don't look at the ratios. I'm not an expert in that. I mean, they've got to go and read the science and find out for themselves what it's all about. So I thought I'd sort of share that with you, that I am a lean mass hyper responder.
That's very interesting. Yeah, and fascinating, because it is one of those areas that stumps people sometimes, and that's why I think it's important, if you are embracing this lifestyle, that you see a GP or a doctor that has an understanding of, cholesterol, beyond what, that total number. They freak out. I know for my mum, she took herself off statins, long story with my mum, but she was like 4 or 5 and that was it, bang, on statins. Just no understanding of all the things you just said, looking at the ratios, looking at your triglycerides, looking at your HDL, but also understanding the role of cholesterol. Like, I really did. Did you do the Nutrition Network's one on immunity? The free one?
Yes, I did.
How fantastic was that?
That was really good. And that was with Dr. Hasina KG. She did the one, didn't she? And then there was somebody.
She did that one in the summit. She talked about it in the summit, but the one through the Nutrition Network, it had the dietitian, I can't think of her name now.
Yes.
It was her and another one of the
Dr.
Neville, yes, Wellington.
Yep.
Yes.
Right.
And I thought that was so good. So I summarized that myself into layman's terms, if you like, because I thought it really explained not only, the role of cholesterol, but just obviously the different parts of our immune system and how we can use diet to help keep it strong. And of course, cholesterol is, the way they described it, I thought it was fabulous. It's like they're the firemen. They're like the firefighters. they're always at the scene of the fire, but they didn't actually cause the fire. So their job is to help with inflammation. So, you know, they're always there. So that means they've always been blamed. But, you know, when you actually look at the job and the role of cholesterol within the body, it doesn't make any sense. Why would you try and lower total cholesterol when their job is actually...
That's right. And it's all about inflammation, as you mentioned. It's quite interesting that my C-reactive protein markers, which is an inflammatory marker, reduced quite substantially, to be honest.
There you go.
It's always been relatively good, but often it would spike. And it's been very, very good. You know, it's below 0.4. So, you know, that's quite a good result. So your inflammatory markers definitely reduce by following a low-carb lifestyle. So your immunity is better, and that's important. And then coming to another topic, I just sort of, my mind's running away with me.
Love it.
When it comes to sports people, a lot of people feel that if you're going to go on a low-carb diet, you're not going to perform. That's not true. I mean, there's so many top-class sports people. If you look at Timothy Olsen, 2-time winner and previous record holder of Western States 100-mile race, he's a low-carb. Many members of the All Blacks rugby team are on low-carb. If you have a look at Sammy Inkinen, he's a co-founder of Virta Health together with Dr. Peony and Faluk. And they're doing such good work. Sammy and his wife, they went rowing. I don't know if you know the story.
Yes, they did it all on fat. Yeah,
the two of them, and they covered something like 4,425 kilometers over that, just on a low carb diet, and had no problem. There is some research, obviously, if you're in a high explosive type of exercise, you probably need a bit of carbs. But even these Ironman athletes do pretty well on the low carb. And then during the race, they might take a little bit of carbohydrates just to assist them with that explosive movement, you know, just to give them that surge during the race. But they're doing pretty well on low carb anyway.
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of people out there, professional athletes, doing really well. I think what people struggle with is just that adaptation and that change and letting their body become, you know, metabolically flexible, helping it along with that. But also, you know, yes, these habits, you know, we've been told one thing and believed one thing for so long. You know, it's going to feel uncomfortable and it's going to take time for change to happen. So, you know, I think just sort of being curious, letting go, trying things, experimenting with things, and just giving your body time to adapt. And I can't see, you know, I had Kimberly Peden, the exercise physiologist who was part of the summit. She's still doing her presentation, but I talked to her last week. And and, you know, she said, look, you absolutely do not need it. Would you like it? And do some people like it? Yes. But in terms of physiology, your body doesn't need it. It has every ability to make what it needs.
That's right. That's right. You know, a lot of people feel that if you're not going to have carbs, you're going to have a problem. But gluconeogenesis, which is a natural way the body will make, the liver will make extra glucose when there's a need for that. You know, in the absence, that's what happens to the Eskimos and people who live completely on no carbohydrate diet. So they tend to function quite well. But coming to that, you know, I suffer quite a lot from old sporting injuries. Excuse me, my shoulders and my back and my neck, and from rugby and gymnastics. And it was about 10 years ago, before the low carb, I said to my wife, you know, and I'd go on this binge of eating a lot of sweets and chocolates, and I'd say to her, you know, my joints are actually worse when I'm having all these sweet and high refined carbohydrates. And she said, it's in my head. She thought, you're just imagining it.
Wow.
So you know, I kept quiet, and she's experienced the same thing. You know, she started eating lower carbs, and you know, joints, so the inflammatory markers must come down, and they do come down. So even from a joint perspective, it helps quite a lot. It certainly does. I know a lot of runners who had knee problems, went onto a low carb, and their pains within their knees disappeared.
Yeah.
There's a lot
Absolutely.
of evidence. There's a lot of evidence.
There is a lot of evidence. Well, Richard, it's been so great to chat to you today. Did you mention your age? Did you let that slip in there? Did you say how old you were before?
60, I will be 69 shortly.
Wow. And still working. Are you still
I'm
working?
still working. I work for
look
my
at that.
son. Funny enough, I have 2 children who live in your part of the woods. My son is actually the head physio for North Melbourne. I know you guys are crazy about this AFL, which I knew nothing about.
Not me, but
you're a weight trainer. But yeah, so they're down there, and I basically work for him now. He sort of took over my practice, and he runs his practice in Wagga Wagga, but he works in high-level sport at the moment. Yeah, and so I do go down to your parts of the wood occasionally.
Lovely, lovely. But obviously no plans to, go give it all up. You must just love it so much.
No, I don't think age is an issue, Tracy. No. I think as long as you can keep going,
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily mean that you might leave the current job you've got and move into something else, but you're doing something. I mean, coming back to Professor Noakes, he says he's retired, but I can tell you now, I don't think he's really retired.
No, he's always doing lives or, writing something and, and thank goodness. And I hope he just keeps going and sharing, and the same with you. Like, I agree, there's no age is just a number. It's all about, one of the things, I suppose, the other benefits of eating this way is that it is, to me, it's the ultimate anti-aging. Like, I don't know, your body just, it's running on premium fuel, and I can't see, I'm a bit younger than you, but I can't see there's any reason why you just wouldn't keep going for as long as possible.
No, I think we should just keep ourselves busy, shouldn't we? We should have a purpose in life when you get up in the morning, and have good relationships and good friends and good family, and,
all of that is so important, isn't it, to our overall health?
Yeah, so many depressing things in the world, and you can just try not to let it get to you. There's a lot of positive things as well. Like
that's right.
Low carbs and good healthy fat.
Yeah, that's right. I think when you look for the good, you'll see the good. There are so many good people in the world, and I love it. And I love getting to talk to people like you. So thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me today on the podcast. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, Tracy, and for all you do in the low carb world, and you're doing tremendous work. Thanks very much.
Oh, thank you, Richard.